In Mindfulness for Anger Management, Dr. Stephen Dansiger opens with a heartfelt acknowledgement: anger is not the enemy. He writes from the perspective of someone who has worked with trauma survivors and people in recovery, stressing that anger, while often seen as destructive, can actually be a signal, a flare for help, change, or protection. His goal is not to suppress anger but to understand and use it wisely. Right from the first chapter, the reader is invited to shift their view of anger from something shameful to something potentially useful. Dansiger builds his argument by weaving together scientific insight and personal anecdotes. He explains how the brain's amygdala, the center for fight-or-flight responses, often hijacks rational thinking in moments of emotional intensity. Anger, he says, is a physiological process before it is a psychological one. Mindfulness, therefore, becomes a critical skill. A way to slow down and observe what's happening in the mind and body without being swept away by it. His storytelling draws from real-life therapy sessions, making these complex ideas feel relatable and lived in. The author introduces mindfulness gradually, aware that it can be intimidating for beginners. He encourages small, manageable practices at first, 5 minutes of mindful breathing or a simple body scan before bed. These exercises are intentionally gentle. Dansiger believes that learning to pause, even briefly, can change the course of an emotional outburst. Each chapter adds new layers of practice, reinforcing the idea that mindfulness is like a muscle that strengthens over time. A particularly powerful section of the book focuses on the anger iceberg. Here, Dansiger tells the story of a client named Marcus, who would explode at minor inconveniences but eventually discovered deep grief beneath his rage. Using this metaphor, Dansiger shows how anger is often just the visible part of a much more vulnerable emotional state. Fear, sadness, shame, and guilt lie beneath the surface, and mindfulness allows us to investigate those layers with kindness rather than judgment. Dr. Dansiger's therapeutic background shines in the way he encourages journaling and reflection. He includes prompts after each chapter that ask the reader to describe a recent angry moment, what triggered it, and what emotions were present underneath. This process isn't about analyzing oneself into oblivion but about cultivating a new kind of curiosity, one that leads to choice and control rather than reactive behavior. One of the most memorable case studies in the book involves a woman named Lena, who had anger flare-ups during arguments with her teenage daughter. Through mindfulness, she learned to identify the physical sensations that preceded her outbursts, tightening in her chest, a racing heartbeat, and was able to intervene with breathwork before she lashed out. Dansiger uses Lena's story to show how small wins build emotional resilience over time. The stop technique is a cornerstone of Dansiger's approach. He breaks it down into 4 simple steps: stop, take a breath, observe, and proceed. While it may seem simplistic on the surface, he shows how this method can become a ritual that rewires habitual reactions. By pausing and checking in with one's body and mind, readers begin to interrupt destructive patterns and replace them with thoughtful responses. What sets this book apart from other anger management guides is its compassion. Dansiger never pathologizes anger or blames the reader. Instead, he treats it like a wounded part of us calling out for attention. He speaks directly to people who have been shamed for their anger, those told they are too much, too sensitive, or too aggressive, and offers a path to healing that begins with radical self-acceptance. He also makes space for readers with trauma histories. He acknowledges that for many people, anger is a survival strategy born in unsafe environments. Mindfulness, in this context, is not about calming down, but about reclaiming agency over one's emotions. Dansiger is careful not to invalidate those whose anger is justified, especially in the face of injustice, but instead, he encourages channeling it constructively. Dansiger expands his view beyond the individual to the social context of anger. He touches on systemic factors, like racism, inequality, and generational trauma, that shape how people express or suppress their emotions. He doesn't offer easy solutions but insists that mindfulness must be adapted to each person's lived experience. Anger, he says, is not always personal, sometimes it's political. And yet, it can still be transformed from within. Throughout the book, mindfulness is described as a lifelong practice, not a quick fix. Dansiger likens it to brushing your teeth, something you do daily not because you're in crisis but because it keeps your system clean and healthy. He suggests integrating mindfulness into routines, during meals, walks, or even while doing dishes. These mindful moments, he argues, are where transformation quietly takes root. In a chapter devoted to relationships, Dansiger explores how anger often masks unmet needs. He shares the story of a couple on the verge of divorce who learned to communicate more mindfully, using I statements and reflective listening. Through practice, they began to hear one another without defensiveness, leading not only to fewer fights but deeper intimacy. This reinforces the book's core message: anger can be a portal to connection rather than division. Another powerful insight comes in the form of urge surfing, a technique borrowed from addiction therapy. Dansiger teaches readers to observe the wave of anger rising, peaking, and eventually falling away. By watching rather than acting on the impulse, individuals gain confidence in their ability to ride out difficult emotions without being overtaken by them. Dansiger's final chapters focus on integrating everything into a personal action plan. He asks readers to design their own anger toolkit, filled with practices that resonate most with them, whether it's journaling, yoga, cold showers, or long walks. The emphasis is on customization, not conformity. Everyone's relationship with anger is different, so their solutions must be too. The book closes with a note of encouragement: anger doesn't make you broken. It means you're human. With mindfulness, you can meet anger not with fear but with awareness, turning even your most difficult moments into opportunities for insight, healing, and growth. Dansiger leaves readers not just with tools, but with hope.